All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first 10 to Communities Not Cages Facebook Live with the Detention Watch Network's organizing team. My name is Stacy Suh, and I am the organizing director at DWN. And so for those of you who are not familiar with DWN, we are a national coalition that builds power through collective advocacy, grassroots organizing, and strategic communications to abolish immigration detention in the United States. And here today, I am joined by my amazing colleagues, Marcela Hernandez and Liz Castillo from the DWN's organizing team. And I'm going to pass it off to Liz to make the same announcement and welcome in Spanish.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos. Este es Facebook Live de la campaña de First 10 a Communities Not Cages, los primeros 10. Sí, para aquellos que no conozcan Detention Watch Network es un grupo nacional que trabaja con sus aliados y sus miembros para abolir la detención de inmigración usando la abogacía, usando comunicaciones y usando el poder de organizar. Hoy vamos a tener el equipo organizativo platicando. Soy yo, mi nombre es Liz, Marcela y Stacy, que es nuestra directora de organizar. Y rápidamente nada más quería mencionar, el programa va a ser en inglés, pero vamos a estar proporcionando interpretación al español. Entonces, para aquellas personas que quieran escuchar este programa en español, solo tienen que ver los comentarios del Facebook. Ahí vamos a estar compartiendo el número telefónico al que pueden hablar y ahí se les va a dar la interpretación en español.
Thank you so much, Liz. So we're going to get started. So before we dive into talking about the First 10 to Communities Not Cages campaign, I want to pass it off to our organizer, Liz, to give us an overview of this new shifting political landscape under the Biden administration and what this means for people in detention and for our communities. So Liz, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Stacy. Hi again, everyone. My name is Liz, and as Stacy mentioned, I'm part of the organizing team. I'm based in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. And yeah, just a quick summary of the landscape and what we're seeing under the Biden administration. Obviously, we've seen the Biden administration take some important actions on immigration, and I can talk quickly more about those in a minute. But on the detention end of things, the very brief summary is that unfortunately we have yet to see the Biden administration take any direct and meaningful positive action on detention. On the enforcement end of things, we did see the 100-day deportation moratorium that was issued at the beginning of this administration. And that speaks volumes, right, to the organizing folks on the ground, of undocumented folks, of directly impacted folks, and allies and partners. And although it's something that was really powerful and important, it's unfortunately something that was almost immediately challenged and sued by the state of Texas. That moratorium remains right now indefinitely on hold, and it's unclear to what extent the Biden administration is really going to try to challenge that and fight that. So the landscape that we're dealing with is unfortunately one of continued mass deportations, including through draconian measures like the Title 42 policy, which is a policy that was actually created under the Trump administration and is still in place today. It's a policy that allows CBP to basically manipulate the pandemic to justify the almost immediate expulsion of folks arriving at the border without any semblance of, a real immigration court process. And it's also something that's worth noting that has disproportionately impacted, Black migrant communities, Black folks arriving at the border. So what we're under right now is actually on enforcement, the Johnson memo, which although it's a memo that narrows who is subject to deportation and enforcement practices from ICE in comparison to the Trump administration days, it's very much still a guideline, a policy that leaves thousands of our community members subject to harm, subject to deportation. It ignores the ways in which white supremacy and the criminal legal system engage in the hyper-criminalization of BIPOC communities, especially Black migrant communities. And just really quickly, broadly, the categories that it zeroes on are national security, border security, and public safety. What is worth noting in a quick summary about these categories, right, is that these are all categories that are subject to ICE's own interpretation and own perspective, right? So we know that these are categories that entangle themselves with the criminal system and the injustice that is engaged in all of that. On the national security and the things we've seen how that's been manipulated time after time to target specific communities, particularly Black and Muslim communities, right? On the border security end of things, they are basically excluding folks who arrive or arriving after November 2020. So leaving a lot of folks subject to enforcement actions. And on the public safety end of things, a lot of what the movement has already seen before, right? The manipulation by ICE and criminalization of folks, both because due to prior entanglements with the criminal injustice system, but also ICE's own interpretation. So there's broad room there for, unfortunately, continued deportations. On the detention end of things, we are seeing some of the lowest detention numbers in decades. And I think it's important to note that this isn't necessarily due to sensible approaches on, ICE's end. A lot of it has to do with the release of people. Sorry, a lot of it doesn't have to do with the release of people under the pandemic, which is what we've been fighting for to free them all. But instead, it has a lot to do with enforcement and border policies. So we just want to name that because, I think we want to think about what's driving what we're seeing. But I do think it's important for us to be aware of the fact that we are seeing the lowest detention numbers in decades, and that this should really serve as an impetus to only go further down from here and face out detention as a whole. We really believe, and our partners believe, that detention is not something that can be reformed. The conditions can't just be improved. Detention is something that is fundamentally flawed and beyond repair and needs to be shut down. And I think that's what this campaign is really trying to get at. Last year was a year in which we saw record deaths, propagation of COVID-19 across detention centers in the country due to ICE's direct negligence and direct actions, record hunger strikes from folks across the country. Since March 2020, we registered about 50 hunger strikes, which means thousands of people have been organizing inside detention and fighting inside detention for their liberation. And even so, with all of that context, we continue to see that negligent refusal to free people. And there have been actually some concerning developments on detention, which I'll touch more on later, but have to do with the rebranding of family detention centers, the possibility of turning some family detention centers into adult detention centers. And obviously right now we're seeing a lot in the news around the expansion of potential child detention facilities, which are actually not under ICE, they're under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, still a troubling development. But all in all, the summary of all of this is that we have yet to see the Biden administration take the concrete action that people inside detention, communities on the ground are demanding around the end to this inhumane system. And the steps needed to live in a world where the hashtag communities not cages is actually reality. And yeah, I think with that, I'll pause and I'll pass it off to Marcela to get even more detailed about the specifics of the campaign and what we're trying to do.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Gracias, Liz. Before I start, I'm going to do a friendly reminder about Spanish interpretation we're offering. Antes de que empiece, quería recordar que sí tenemos interpretación al español. Si gusta escuchar esto en español, puede marcar al 312-626-6799 y este número también está en la descripción del evento en nuestra página de Facebook, the Detention Watch Network, y en los comentarios. So yes, I'm also part of the organizing team. I'm based out of California. And for all the reasons mentioned, for years, communities have been organizing against detention and deportations, including people inside of detention, like Liz mentioned. So Detention Watch Network launched the Communities Not Cages campaign in 2018 as a vehicle to support the long history of local organizing, support organizations and communities that wanted to start organizing and coordinate a national strategy to shut down detention centers in their localities, stop the expansion of detention, the construction of new facilities, and ultimately abolish the immigrant detention system in its entirety. Currently, there are more than 23 ongoing local shutdown and anti-expansion campaigns that are part of the national Communities Not Cages effort. So it's really been great to see the power of our organizing efforts come together nationally. DWN and our members have organized and had many victories from the passage of state legislation in California to ban immigrant detention, led by the Dignity Not Detention Coalition, to the end of the last ICE detention contract in Oregon, led by the Rural Organizing Project, to stopping expansion proposals under the Trump administration in Wyoming. Those efforts were led by Wild Say No Coalition. Stop expansion in Illinois, those efforts led by ICER and OCAD. And like Liz mentioned last year, following the lead of our local members, we also quickly responded to the COVID pandemic, and across the nation, we saw the call to free them all become wide and strong. So the first 10 to Communities Not Cages is the next phase of DWN's National Communities Not Cages campaign, demanding the shutdown of 10 immigrant detention facilities in the first year of this new administration. The first 10 detention centers are emblematic of how the immigration system is inherently abusive, unjust, and fatally flawed beyond repair. We are demanding the Biden administration to shut down these detention centers immediately and end detention contracts so that these facilities don't become other types of cages of incarceration. The first 10 detention centers provide a roadmap of where to start to abolish detention. So our members and partners, have been leading strong organizing efforts at these first 10 sites, many working to provide support for immigrants navigating their immigration cases. And simply put, we do know that people navigating their immigration case can and should do so with their families and in community, not behind bars in immigrant detention. We believe that every person has the right to move and live freely in communities and with their family without fear of being separated from their loved ones or displaced from their home. So we invite you all to join us in this journey, to continue supporting local efforts, and we'll talk more about how you can get engaged in our call to Communities Not Cages and for first 10 to Communities Not Cages. So I'll pass it over now to Stacy to talk a little bit more about the first 10.
Thanks so much, Marcella. As Marcella mentioned, this work has been ongoing for decades, right? So there's been so much movement and organizing and hard work from so many community members, both formerly and currently detained folks, as well as community organizers, their family members, loved ones. I think we can all play a role in this movement to end detention, and we really invite you to join us. I'm going to start sharing a little bit more in detail about some of the first 10 facilities, which are emblematic of systemic issues in immigration detention. So for Irwin Detention Center and Etowah County Jail in Alabama, they represent many of the problems in rural facilities where folks are detained really far from community and legal support in horrific conditions. And we know that by design, all forms of incarceration, including immigration detention, are basically very, very isolating. And Irwin and Etowah are prime examples of some of the most severe cases of ICE's trademark abuse. So, for example, as many of you may have learned that at Irwin, there were recent reports of gynecological procedures that were performed on women detained at Irwin without their consent. While Etowah County Sheriff pocketed over $750,000 over 3 years in surplus food funds by serving people inside with rotting food. So we know the conditions are horrific, and we know there's ample evidence and countless stories from folks inside that these things are true. And in addition to displaying some of these similar issues, detained folks in Farmville and Otero have also experienced some of the worst COVID-19 outbreaks in the immigration detention system. due to ICE's dangerous detention practices. So, for example, Otero in New Mexico has been one of the ICE facilities with most confirmed COVID-19 cases due to transfers, lack of testing, and other negligent practices. While almost 93% of people inside Farmville Detention Center in Virginia had tested positive for COVID-19 by mid-July of last year. And I think despite all of these horrific conditions, we have to remember that there are people who are continuing to organize both inside and outside in the face of great violence and retaliation from ICE. And I'm speaking particularly to currently and formerly detained community members who bear the brunt of this violence. And so before I pass it off to Marcela again to talk about some of the other detention facilities within the first 10, I want to read this quote from Alex, who is a formerly detained community leader who was formerly detained at Farmville Detention Center, who continues to advocate for the shutdown of Farmville Detention Center after his release. So he said, as someone who was previously detained at Farmville, I want to share my story about the suffering I lived at Farmville. I can help speak up for those who cannot speak up while they are still being detained and still suffering racism, violence, mental abuse, oppression, poor health conditions, and hunger. So really inviting folks to join us in this fight to end immigration detention, and let's get to first 10 to Communities Not Cages in the first year of the Biden administration. So I'll pass it off to Marcela to talk about some of the other facilities that are included within the first 10.
Yes. Also, local communities in California and Texas have long pushed for the closure of the Adelanto, Mesa Verde, and Huddle detention centers, which all have extensive also histories of sexual, physical, and mental abuse and medical neglect. And what we have seen in this specific contracts, and also that speaks to other patterns we've seen in the past, is that ICE has actually circumvented a lot of the community efforts by engaging in devious contract practices to lock in long-term contracts despite local opposition, by circumventing state legislation that, for example, was passed in California. And most recently, another immigrant community member was left to die 3 days after I supposedly released him from custody after having a stroke inside of the detention center. So we know detention is deadly. We know ICE lies. We know ICE hides information. We know ICE retaliates, which is why we need to end detention and defund ICE. So I'll pass it over to Liz to talk more about the other facilities in this first 10 campaign.
Yeah, so I'll speak to 3 facilities, the Berks, Carnes, and Dilly. They're often referred to as the residential centers, right? But what we know that they are family detention centers, ICE family detention centers. And these 3 detention centers are also part of the first 10 list. They compose the largest family detention program in the US since the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans nearly a century ago. And, you know, we see a lot of similarities in terms of the reports of abuse that have come out of these facilities year after year after year. And it's, you know, the type of abuses that have been talked about earlier today as occurring in adult detention facilities as well. While we are pleased to hear and see some of the recent developments around the release of families at places like Berks that were previously being held there, right, we remain extremely concerned about the future of these facilities. No one should spend a single minute at detention. Detention is not safe for children, for families, for adults, for anyone. But we do know, right, that the effects are particularly devastating for children. And it's for that reason that these facilities are on the list. We have seen some recent developments where, you know, some of these detention centers, particularly the ones in Texas, Carnes, and Dilly, have been rebranded as so-called reception centers. That is a move that we reject. We know that as long as ICE is in the mix, There's no way that families and children can be safe. The only pathway forward is to shut these places down. There shouldn't be any family detention in the same way that there shouldn't be any adult detention centers or adult detention. So we continue to push for a phase out of detention, not the rebranding, and also not the exchange or expansion of the system in any other way, right? Which is what we're seeing come up with Berks, where there's been signals that the detention center there might stop detaining might stop detaining children and families and instead become a place where adult women are detained. It's worth noting that this is a pathway that we've seen before. This happened with the Huddle Family Detention Center. It once also detained families, and due to all of the abuses that were coming out of there and the groups on the ground, like grassroots leadership and others were exposing, they decided to stop detaining families and instead started detaining only women. And to this day, the abuses there continue. And as Marcela shared, Huddle is still among the first 10 facilities that were pushing for closure. So the basic bottom line here is no rebranding, no new messaging. Like, these are places where abuse happens and they need to be shut down permanently, and family detention, like all detention, should be brought to a complete end. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to my colleagues.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz and Marcella. And, I think it's been amazing to see the growth in our movement to end immigration detention, and we'll continue to build and move forward so that we can get more people free. We can shut down detention centers and deportation. So before we move into how we can all collectively take action, because, collective action is what's going to get us through this. I wanted to just give a shout out to some of the community partners and organizations that are also live broadcasting on their Facebook pages. So wanted to give a quick shout out to Raíces, Free Them All, El Paso, La Colectiva, Detained Migrant Solidarity Committee, Shutdown Berks, Sanctuary DMB, Suru for Solidarity, Georgia Detention Watch, Grassroots Leadership, Dignity Not Detention California, and Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice. And also wanted to remind folks that in the comments on DWN's Facebook page, we are adding links to local partners who have been leading these shutdown fights for many, many years. And we really encourage you to get involved with those organizations, support them, take action, and continue to build with us and take action to let's get to first 10 to communities, not cages. So wanted to remind folks about that. And now I will pass it off to Marcella to talk about how we can all take action to get us closer to first 10 to communities, not cages in the next year.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. And just quickly gonna remind folks that we have Spanish interpretation. So si apenas nos está sintonizando, gracias por sintonizarnos, y recordatorio que sí tenemos interpretación al español. El número que puede marcar está en la descripción de este evento y en los comentarios, así que lo invitamos a que también si necesita nos escuche en español. Gracias. Yes, so how can, after hearing all of this, what can we do about it, right? And so this week, actually, we are in the first half of the first 10 to communities, not cages, week of action. We started yesterday circulating different sign-on letters in our petition. So if you're an organization, definitely invite you to sign on or sign-on letter. If you're a faith leader or part of a congregation, our partners are also anchoring a faith-based letter. If you're an individual that's trying to support these efforts, we do have a petition. All of that information is in our toolkit, which you can access at bit.ly/first10CNC. It is case sensitive, so we are posting the link in our comments. Also, we have more calls to action this week, more events. So we invite you to join us on Thursday. We're gonna have a Twitter storm. And on Friday, we're gonna have a phone swap. So again, our toolkit has that information. We invite you to sign up to let us know if you're gonna be tweeting with us, if you're gonna join the phone swap, and also, promote it widely. We want as many folks to join these efforts, even if you just have a minute a day, or if you do have more capacity to engage in this fight. We welcome all of that. One call, one email can go a long way to collectively build visibility around our demands and pushing decision makers to take action. And also, if you're interested in giving more of your time, as we mentioned before, there's amazing local efforts taking place by our members. So if you do want to connect with those local efforts to see if there's some in your state, again, we invite you to visit our website and contact us and sign up for our action alerts at www.detentionwatchnetwork.org. Specific for this campaign, again, visit our toolkit. And there's a few of our members that are organizing local actions in Texas and California digitally. So definitely we invite you to follow us on social media, in our Instagram, our Facebook, our Twitter. We have every day ways that you can take action. And like I said, 1 or 5 minutes of your time could go a long way. And if you already took action, we challenge you to ask 5 friends, family, community members, your networks, to also take action and join us in this fight. So thank you for being here with us. We look forward to building more with you. And if you want to learn more about this campaign, about these facilities, we invite you to visit our website for more information. So I'll pass it over to Stacy now.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcella. Again, there are so many ways you can take action, and I think there's a place for everyone in our movements to take action to, really end immigration detention. So really encourage you and your loved ones and your community to take action, because, when we organize, we can win, and we have to keep pushing. So thank you all for joining us. And so I think we're going to move into Q&A now. And there's a question from one of our audience members who asked, how can we help the situation that is happening at the border now? So I'll pass it off to Marcella and Liz to talk about Defund Hate campaign, as well as some of the other, policies or ways to take action that can be supportive of, what's happening at the border. So go ahead, Marcella.
Yes, I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is because our government is funding agencies like ICE and CBP. So we also have another campaign at the national level called Defund Hate, and that campaign focuses on organizing around the appropriations national process to take away funding from ICE and CBP and really push for that funding to actually be invested in our communities and what we need, right? We already saw under the pandemic how much, and even before the pandemic, how much need there is in our communities. So we also invite you again to go to our website and sign up for action alerts. We also send action alerts for our Defund Hate campaign, where folks can send messages to your members of Congress around defunding ICE and CBP. And that campaign is also gonna start picking up in the upcoming weeks. So definitely we invite you to sign up for action alerts and follow us on our social media for more updates. And I'll pass it on to Liz on like what else can folks do in the immediate to support that.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question and very much appreciated. So one thing that I'll quickly say is I think it's important to note, and this is a lot of what's missing from the conversation right now, is that historically border communities have, always stepped up and played a role in welcoming folks and ensuring that folks receive the basic support that they need, right, in a way that only community can do, and that we know from a fact, just from proven record, ICE and CBP can't do. So one, want to just like name that and uplift that, because I think a lot of it is missing, and amidst all this incentivization and weaponization that happens of the border for political purposes, that gets lost. So I think it's important to uplift this work and the groups at the border, some of our members at the border, Rio Grande Valley Equal Voice Network, the Tame Migrant Solidarity Committee. There's just a few, AFSC as well. San Diego is doing really important work. But also the other piece that I think doesn't get addressed around all of this is the way in which our own policies are actually the policies that are driving the separation of families and leading to children being labeled as unaccompanied when they might not actually be. Policies like the Title 42 policy, right? A lot of these things actually drive the separation of family units. And because that's not being inspected as closely, there's instead this conversation, right, about expanding like influx facilities and child detention facilities, which we know from child advocates, from child experts, that any amount of time that children are in government custody is a threat through their well-being, and that they need to be there the least amount of time possible, and that our resources should really be invested in ensuring that children are with their families and with their communities, which is not the way that our system is built up right now. So I think it's just important to unpack, like, one, the role that we're playing in actually separating children from their caretakers, from their loved ones, and two, like, look past some of the sensibilization that happens into what the communities on the ground are actually doing and how they're responding, and what that presents for a vision where communities and not cages is actually true.
Yeah, thank you both, Marcella and Liz, for sharing your insightful knowledge and work. There's so much work ahead of us, and we really do need every person in this movement to end immigration detention. So just a quick reminder, we are responding to questions in DWN's Facebook feed. So I'm going to give folks like a minute to migrate over to the DWN Facebook page if you're tuning in from a different Facebook page. We're going to start wrapping up very soon after maybe like one or two more questions. And if there aren't any, we'll conclude. But there are so many ways to take action. Again, we are kicking off the week of action, and there are so many different ways to get involved, whether you're a faith leader, a community member, a directly impacted community leader. So we really encourage you all to participate in the week of action. So just want to remind folks again of, there's a First 10 to Communities Not Cages petition. And so if you already signed, if you haven't signed, you should sign. And then if you already signed, we really encourage you to share with 5 of your friends, text them, call them, say hello, get them to sign the petition. And then we have our Twitter storm on Thursday and our phones app on Friday. And there are other digital actions that are happening that are anchored by our members. And so just visit the full toolkit for this campaign at bit.ly/first10cnc for more information. And we'll also drop the link to the Facebook comment as well. So let me check real quick and see if there are any questions. And then Liz, did you want to add something real quick?
I just wanted to add, that it's us 3 here on the Facebook Live, but this campaign is led, right, it's spearheaded by the tremendous work that several of the groups that we already mentioned have been leading for years. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the different groups, and we have a list on our toolkit, but yeah, it's the folks on the ground who have been leading the work, and just want to make sure that we plug them and for folks to follow them. So reminder, check out the toolkit and give a like, give some love to all of those folks.
Yeah, and I think we can't do this work alone, right? And we really build with each other and support each other through the struggle to end immigration detention. So if you are locally close to one of the organizations that's leading the fights to shut down all of these different detention centers. Really encourage you all to follow them on social media, figure out ways to volunteer or plug into local events, because we also know that, local organizers and groups have been doing this work for a long time, and we're only stronger when we come united, come coordinated, and really put pressure on the Biden administration to shut down first 10 detention facilities in his first year of his office. So with that, it seems like there aren't any additional questions. Oh, there's one question here. What are demands people can make to their congressional representatives to demand to support first 10? So wonder if anyone wants to take that one, or if I should take that one. Yeah. Okay. So there is a member of Congress strategy, and we'll have actually more action steps on reaching out to your local elected official to come out in support of First 10. And I also want to acknowledge that a lot of the local shutdown fights who are partners have already been in conversation and have reached out to a lot of the local elected officials. So definitely stay tuned for how we can also apply pressure to our local reps. And then also wanted to flag too that there's going to be calls to action targeting key members of Congress around the Defund Hate campaign to cut ICE and CBP's budget. And so there will be more detailed calls to action coming soon. So really, again, encourage y'all to stay in touch with us, and via whether it's social media or by getting involved with local organizations that are leading these fights. That said, thank you all so much for tuning in today. It was great to have so many folks join and participate, and we look forward to another amazing week of action to get us to first 10 to Communities Not Cages. So thank you all so much. Take care, and we'll continue to push. Thank you.